Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. John Ottman returns to Popcorn Talk to discuss Nice Guys, X-Men Apocalypse, and of course his journey as an editor and composer. Stay tuned.
Welcome to Popcorn Talk, featuring movie discussion, news, and interviews. Popcorn Talk, we talk movie. And now, here's Popcorn Talk's iTalk Movie.
That's right, ladies and gentlemen. We have Demetri, Panos here.
Hello, movie fans.
And I'm your host, Phil Svitek. As promised on Anatomy of a Movie, we would get John Ottman back, and we have done that deed. Welcome, sir.
On the psychologist couch over here.
Welcome back. We've got questions for you, sir. So
All right.
welcome back.
Thanks.
You've had quite the
Time
busy.
flies. Feels like I was just here, but in some other neighborhood we were in.
Yeah, it's a time warp zap thing for you. Yeah, it's
An
crazy.
alternate universe.
It's an
Alternate
Well,
timeline.
I can tell you about alternate universes. Just walk into my world.
Well, we will get to that.
No, there's stuff I can't tell you about.
You have had quite the busy since X-Men Days of Future Past. It was shortly announced thereafter that going right into Apocalypse, and then you added another hyphenate to your multi-hyphenate. You became a co-producer.
Oh yeah. Well, I've always been sort of had that role in our films, but it sort of was an acknowledgement of the other stuff that I do, because I'm sort of the overseer of the thing. So I've had producer credits in the past, but this one was, I guess, a step up.
Yeah, and as you know, execs don't really take it seriously unless it's like on digital film. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm a co-producer. Really? Does it say so here?
Yeah. I've been an associate producer on a couple films. I was exec producer on Valkyrie, it's not like I mean, a producer is such a nebulous title.
Yeah.
It can be anything. So in my I guess the title referring to me is basically acknowledging that I go beyond what maybe another editor would do. It's sort of, again, I'm on from the beginning and designing the sequences and overseeing steering the ship, so to speak.
Does it, when you were here and you talked X-Men Days of Futures Past, we remember you had said that print, basically through editing, you had to take certain things out. The rogue, you were kind enough to talk to us very much about the rogue sequences that were
Right.
taken out, and you had to put, you were taking them out, doing everything very last minute, changing things to score, and you said a lot of that, if I remembered correctly, that came from a lot of the execs at Fox. Does having a co-producer credit give you a little bit more?
No, I've always had the same, for lack of a better word, clout. I mean, I'm very involved as one of the filmmakers, and so if I have an opinion, I think it had the same weight as it had without the official title.
Really?
So, that Days of Future Past thing was, I guess, the rogue idea was inspired by some comments from executives, but we all believed in the decision, after it came down.
Yeah.
But now, it's interesting, real quick kind of about that. It's out now, the road cut, and people have kind of gotten to see it, and they actually enjoyed that, and it's almost like a 50-50 of which one they like better. I mean, do you take that as a compliment? And in fact, you also have to write music for it, too.
Again, when a film in the theater has to have a certain pacing because you're locked in this environment, and it's something that's intangible you can't describe. But the rogue version threw that pacing all off within that environment. When you're at home, you're cooking a hamburger in the barbecue, or you're in your you're in your bed watching, or in the living room, friends. It's a different environment completely, and so the rogue cut is able to work. I think, with all that material in the theatrical release, I think there would have been some complaints that it dragged,
Interesting. Because X-Men Apocalypse comes in a healthy 2+ hours. I think it was the longest X-Men movie.
Yeah, well, it had the burden of having to introduce all these characters.
Right.
And no matter which way we tried to reconceive to introduce them all, you just had to. And I did it in the leanest way possible, but still you have to do it.
Yeah.
And then when the bad guy comes in, he has to recruit all these people.
Right.
And so it's quite a while before it kicks into the main storyline, his storyline
Right.
of what he wants to do. Excuse me. So yeah, that was probably the most difficult part of the movie, is how to keep it interesting, basically, and before everything starts happening.
Well, while we're on this topic, I mean, what was your initial cut? What did it come in at?
2.5.
2.5.
Yeah.
So you.
I mean, that's pretty lean already.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I do that, and we've talked about that. Where
Yeah.
it's in my interest to have the leanest, most polished first cut as possible, because I have to write the score, and I can't have a problem child on our hands, because it's going
Right.
to kill me. So I have more vested interest probably than anybody on the movie to get as much shot in Montreal, wherever we're shooting,
Right.
And have it in the can before we get back to LA as possible. And so I just have made myself as clairvoyant as possible to anticipate every crisis or problem that's going to happen.
Right.
And that's my nature too. I figure always the worst is going to happen, and so I try to prepare for it. Like Hank says in the film, prepare for the worst.
Right.
He says, prepare for the worst, hope for the best.
Right. So and in this, like one of the scenes that we talked about on Anatomy that got excised was the mall scene.
Yeah.
So is there going to be like an X-Men Apocalypse mall cut?
No. I mean, we'll have that as an isolated scene on the
Yeah.
DVD, but again, there's nowhere in the film that could go without it really dragging the
Right.
film down. Because the mall scene, as fun as it is by itself, it's a scene about nothing. Nothing happens in that scene except walking around and seeing things at the mall.
Right.
In the original version of the script, they went to the mall, and then there was an altercation, and something happened, and so there was a reason. And if you look at any classic montage in movies where they're interesting, they're always leading to something that happens, or they're about something, whether it's designing an outfit, or with the guy I edited the film with, we went through all these different movies of classic montages, and they're always about something.
Yep.
And this was about nothing. And so no matter where we would put it, it suddenly felt like, okay, let's just stop the movie and we're going to have fun. And also, there was really no place to put it until after Apocalypse had started his recruitments and so forth. And so the movie is taking a darker tone. And you would think, yeah, well, it's nice to just break it up with something light, but it really felt completely out of place. And it felt so frivolous that it stopped the story completely.
Was there a character that also maybe a story like Rogue in Days of Futures Past that may have been shortened, cut out completely, not as much, or was there something, a favorite of yours?
Oh, in this movie?
Yeah.
No, I mean,
Apocalypse
unlike the Rogue cut, there wasn't a lot that we cut out in this film that I think, we should have put that in. There's maybe one scene that where Scott says goodbye to his brother outside the mansion before Havoc drives off with Xavier to the CIA building, and we cut that out again because it just was one extra beat, just stumbled the pace of the film. But I think if there were a longer cut of the film,
Right.
which I don't think there will be, but that would be a scene that would
go back.
Here's why I think that works. I don't know if you guys thought about this, but I like it because oftentimes you don't get to say goodbye before something tragic does happen. So I thought it worked in the movie for that reason.
There's
Rather
a scene
than just
where he's
time.
at the crater. Like there's
Right.
a scene where he's at the crater, and you just sort of kind of got that feeling that he said goodbye, and it was, at least that's the way. I know you and I talked about this.
Yeah,
too.
this
I
was
just
sort of a
felt.
foreshadowing scene earlier,
okay.
where he says, I'm going to go to the CIA with Havoc says I'm going to go to the CIA with Xavier. Hope you behave yourself here at the school. And he's got his bandages on his eyes, and it was sort of like, bye brother, see you later. And it's like, and there's a long, and so it was a foreshadowing thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that would have been cool to say. Well, we'll see it under the deleted scene.
Yeah.
So, we do want to, as much I want to talk Apocalypse, and while we were talking about editing, a lot of times you have like a scene that you and Brian might love, but due to time constraint, you have to like make that Sophie's choice. Mm-hmm. Was there anything in Apocalypse outside of that Scott scene?
There's one specifically which was heartbreaking for everybody, especially me.
Yeah.
And I objectively knew as well it had to go. And it was really the tail end of the scene in the forest with Magneto. He loses his family. He's huddling with his family. And what the actor decided to do on his own volition, he told Brian, just roll. I'm going to do something here. So he then sung this lullaby I wrote that he briefly sings in the bedroom scene to his daughter. And he sings it. And it's devastating. But the scene in the forest is so long already. And when he hugs them, that's where the scene should end. But he hugs them, and then he starts singing this lullaby, and it's beautiful. And again, by itself, it's devastating and fantastic, but it just was an extra beat that stalled the forward momentum of the movie. And that was, and it was a last-minute cut, because there's not one person who didn't want it in the movie. Not one person.
I wanted in the movie. I mean, I got chills.
But it really, again, it's one of those things where, and also he used to sing the lullaby in far more detail in the bedroom for her. So it was this bookend to his life and the actor very instinctively decided to sing it, in the forest, and it was great. But
you folks are, you have Fassbender playing this character, and he's owned this character since day one, and he just seems to. He really, at least as a fan, I get that he enjoys playing this character and putting his nuances into this and making it making it like a notion. Like you really get that it's you see the turmoil.
Yeah.
That he wants to do good. He wants to listen to Charles, but ultimately his nature is like, I try, and this is what they do, and I gotta go here. Is that? I mean.
Yeah, or he's a serious actor in turmoil because he's in a superhero movie. And, he is an artist and a professional. And so I don't know how much he enjoys it or doesn't enjoy it, but the fact is he knows that this is his craft. It's like if I score a really bad movie, I'm going to want to write the best score I can.
Sure.
And I think he's that way. And you can really tell when we do ADR with him and so forth. Because he could be rather intense, because I know that he's very worried about his performance.
Of course. Yeah. That's fantastic.
And I think it's hard for him because I know in Days of Future Past, he'd come in, and then suddenly he sees himself on a green screen in a cape, and he's like, what am I doing? So I think it's very disconcerting on a film like this to worry about how you're going to come off as a serious actor.
Well, what he's doing is Assassin's Creed. After this,
right?
Yeah,
it's like I see that. I'm like,
I mean, he was great in Steve Jobs. Fantastic movie. Yeah, he's a great actor.
Yeah, he'll always work. I mean,
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So I want to jump back in time a little bit. We want to slingshot around the sun, so to speak, and I want to talk about everything. When Phil and I were talking about having this conversation, there's so much to go from, but it all started off. To me, anyways, 4th grade clarinet, right? Playing music. You're in band, okay? You are now. I want to know when. So you're in band. When did this love and passion for music, and then you became involved? Like you loved classical music. Is that around this, like going into high school years?
Oh my God, I can't remember. I don't know. No, it's I played the clarinet only because I was clarinet was elementary school, and it's only because someone brought in musical instruments one day. Look at all these different instruments you could play. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. That looks cool. So I started playing that one. I always regretted it and to take up the piano because it would have been easier for me to write music. I'm really not that terrific at it. But trying to think, I never intended to do anything professionally in music. I made films from an early age when I was...
Well, you were also making radio plays, and then the shift happened to movies.
Tell me what happened in my life. I would write these little cassette radio plays, and then I'd do like multiple voices with my friend and so forth, and that stepped up into doing Super 8 films, and I would use my parents' garage and clear it all out and build a set, and one was like a Star Trek movie, and one was like a Space 1999 movie called Space Journey. And
the eagle has landed.
I had a big eagle. We used the strings and a whole bit.
Was it hard to recruit? Because I remember, like for me, right, you hear a lot of those types of stories, but I remember growing up, like the product just never matched my vision, and so I got so discouraged because none of my friends were like, okay, I'll be in it, but so what was your?
I thought it pretty easy to recruit people. I mean, everyone wants to be in a movie, but I mean, I don't know. I don't really remember reflecting upon what I'd done. I just kind of moved on to the next thing. But and then when the films started becoming more refined and I had soundtrack and so forth, I would start using film scores.
Yeah.
You know, as a lot of composers of my era, the story goes, I saw Star Wars and you know, wow, big orchestral thing, and it made me more focused on film scoring. And then when Alien came out, I became a Jerry Goldsmith fan, and Star Trek: The Motion Picture, of course, cemented it forever. But before that, I think what really made me cognizant of using themes and really kind of taught me a lot about character motifs was the original Star Trek series that I watched in the rerun phase in the 70s, and so that had a big impact on my brain, you know. And so I really approach still everything from a thematic point of view, because that was so ingrained in me, the original Star Trek series, where they had to reuse all these themes and reuse all this material because they could only afford to score every third or fourth episode, you know. Yeah, and then I guess what cemented that was the Star Wars experience and Goldsmith and so forth.
It's so funny because it was similar for me in a way, because again, growing up watching Star Trek as a kid, you know, I'm not paying attention and not really fully understanding. Oh my God, they're scoring this orchestra, you know, with an orchestra, and with a choir, and like, you know. You don't think about what that really means until you see a Jaws or Star Wars, where again it's orchestra, so you see the leap from TV to screen.
Yeah, and it wasn't typical TV music. I mean, it was that Roddenberry wanted adventure scores on a TV show, and you know, you look at it now and it's dated, but still, I mean, until you hear like it reperformed or you get the album, and it's still fantastic music. You know.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
And to this day, I still think John Williams may have lifted a little bit from the Doomsday Machine into Jaws. When you hear those two, they're a little bit. It's like that. Doomsday Machine is Jaws in space in a sense.
Yeah, you know? But Dvorak's Ninth has the same thing. So you know, yeah. And when you talk about classical music, it's because when I started being cognizant of film scores, I wanted more and more, and so I went to Tower Records one day, or this place that used to exist in my era.
What is that?
Yeah, and I went to the classical section. I asked the guy, "Can you give me anything that sounds like film music?" And so he found these symphonies. You know, of course, Holst the Planets and Symphony Antarctica by Vaughan Williams, all these things. And so then it kind of crossed me over, and I got into stuff that wasn't film-ish, film-like music, but it was close, you know. And then I would go to the local symphony and watch my favorite piece be performed, and I would realize, oh, that's oboes doing that. Oh, that's the cello doing that over there. You know, and so it made me learn even more, knowing a piece so intimately, than watching it be performed.
And how old were you at this time?
I have no idea.
Because like where I'm getting so clarinet, science fiction lover, Star Trek lover, listen to classical music, and I say this with love. So you were popular in school. I take it because
I don't think anyone knew who I was in school.
Because I was the kid that like I would show up to show and tell with the AMT model of the Enterprise, and tell them, the best ship, the greatest ship in the universe, travels at warp speed here in the cells, and there were many a time I was picked last for the kickball team, you know, and I would go home and somebody would you know, inadvertently break my model before I got home. So so it's just like as a geek, you start young. Like all this is ingrained, and I don't know when it kicks in. Like when I start, because again, for Star Wars, for me, that was big. It was a double-gated album.
Yeah, and for me, Star Trek kind of defined my viewpoint on society and life, and I could talk about Star Trek for 3 hours straight. So let's not go. Better not go there. But
we're gonna
Star Trek,
come back.
Star Trek.
Star Trek for me as well. But it was because of my love of Star Trek that I couldn't wait for Star Wars. And then when I, you know. But sometimes I'll wear a Star Wars shirt or a Star Trek shirt with a Star Wars hat, and people are like, "No, you can't do that." I'm like, Yeah, absolutely, they can do that. Like, they coexist. They can. I mean,
well, they can. They're completely two different futures,
absolutely.
though. But yeah, today the future for this generation has to be dark and dystopian and depressing, and my generation, the future was a hopeful place where everything's going to be better. We got through our differences, and it's a good place to hope for. And we've completely gotten away from that. And even the new Star Trek, it's like lasting into darkness, and the score's darker, and everything is not. It's not a place of wonder or astonishment anymore.
Yeah, it's a little different. But I wanted to talk to, like, your parents seem to have been very either patient and or nurturing or both, because like. Look where you are. They allowed you to turn your garage into a movie studio, in a sense. So I want to know a little bit about, because my mom, like, she hated that I watched Star Trek. She thought it was stupid. Like, I love my mom, don't get me wrong, this little Greek woman and all, but why do you watch this? It's stupid, Demetri. Why? And it would just turn into an argument. And if they wanted to punish me, they took away Star Trek. So,
wow.
Oh yeah,
wow.
Oh yeah, it was It could be.
I am so lucky. I had the best parents anyone could ever have. And they were. I mean, if I wanted to be a plumber, they would be all for it. I mean, it's whatever I wanted to do.
Yeah.
There was no pressure like you have to do this or that. So, and I always knew what I wanted to do. So when I started making these movies, or like, do it. So. I always just got total support, and Michael Giacchino stole my speech. If I ever got up there for an Oscars, he basically said the same thing when he got his Oscar. He said, it's for my parents, because they just encouraged me to do whatever I wanted to do, and that has a huge, I think makes a huge impact on.
Did they love movies as much as you did, or science fiction? Or
no, I mean, my dad loved. It was an engineer, and he, I got his genes in terms of the curiosity factor. He's just curious about everything. How they build that? What's that made of? And so that kind of was ingrained in me too. And so science fiction is still sort of discovery of things, and astrophysical phenomena and so forth. And he would watch Star Trek once in a while with me and so forth.
Yeah. I always find that it helps. I used to watch Star Trek with my dad. And then it led me down many paths, and I agree with you as well that there's so much differences between Trek and Wars, which we can talk about forever. But I really want to talk about going into scoring, and you went to USC. And look, you got a good head in your shoulder. I mean, you apparently you came from a good gene pool. Like when you talk about, there aren't many people who can say, "Well, I compose and edit." That's in your one of your theses you wrote, or one of your essays, you talk about editing and what it used to lead to. You talk about how editing could lead to directing, and it's a little bit different today. The cinematography also makes sense that you can go into directing and such. But
well, in the past, the editor often, as a career path, would become a director, and which makes sense because the editor is involved in every facet of the filmmaking process. Now, you have a lot of editors who may not be people persons, and so they wouldn't be good at directing actors. So those editors wouldn't be good directors. But Robert Wise, and there's a lot of different famous directors who were editors, and it makes sense. And then began this whole thing where someone would write a script and they would leverage the studio to be the director if they wrote the script. And so you had, in many cases, not all cases, screenwriters who were directing movies and had no idea how to make a movie, had no idea the process worked, how to direct actors and so forth, or how to see the bigger picture, because as you know, a movie is completely different from the screenplay, and everything changes, and so but that's become the sort of norm now, and then people ironically are being bailed out by their editor. But everyone's different, and so there are brilliant writers who become brilliant directors. You look at Tarantino, my God. So there's always an exception to the rule.
So Phil, you were in your notes. I noticed you talked about USC, and you had something that you were talking about a shift like you were talking about, going from music. What brought you into USC? Like, why did you want to go? Why did you want to go to a film school? Where? How
Well,
did that shift
I didn't
happen?
never had any intention of writing film scores. So
Right.
my intention was to be a filmmaker. And
Okay.
so, and I'd done so many movies as a kid and gotten local attention in San Jose, where I grew up, and so forth, that I used all that for my portfolio to apply to SC, who actually would look at what the things you've done and consider that. Where when you apply to UCLA, all they wanted to know was your GPA. There was no consideration of the creative stuff you'd done. So I used a lot of that to get in. I didn't get in the first time, and then I applied again and got accepted.
Yeah, and in one of your essays that I also read on your website, you kind of talked about how filmmakers should really be encouraged to meet filmmakers, especially in a college setting, and it seemed like that's what you're able to do. I mean, from the way it reads, you developed quite a reputation as like the go-to guy for editing and then composing eventually.
Yeah, I mean, editing wasn't the thing I wanted to do. It's just a byproduct of the films I'd be making, and I got known as being a good editor based upon the films they were watching, and because of my philosophy, it was just like do this essay I wrote.
Yeah.
If someone wanted me to edit a movie for them, sure, I'll do it. Even though it's not what I want to do, I'm going to do it, because the more you do, the more something else is apt to happen, and you never know. I mean, I'm going to reiterate my whole essay, but
people can go to johnottman.com.
John Ottman.
Yeah. But I mean, rarely, especially early on, do you ever say, "No, I'm not going to do that." I mean, you just do it.
Right.
And and so
For you, what defines a good editor? I mean, if you had to quantify it in the vaguest of sense.
The vaguest of sense. Well, I mean, I think in those general sense, you have to. I mean, as it is for every facet of filmmaking process, to be a good storyteller, you got to be able to step back and see the bigger picture. But I don't know. I mean, I think the more I don't know how to describe it. It's sort of it's filmmaking.
I mean,
Problem solver. I mean, in a
but
sense,
you also talk about attitude as well, meaning you gotta have the right attitude. And I know you kind of from the way you've been talking, to you it almost seems like a no-brainer. You have to do and do this, but you would be surprised the amount of people that Demetri and I have talked to, that don't share. They just don't see that vision. They're not, and it blocks them career-wise, and they wonder why.
Yeah, it's interesting where some people feel like, oh well, I know how to put something together. I should do it, and learning a process and talking with you, and even again, I think you wrote 2 really great essays that talk about 2 very different things, but your do mentality. It's sort of kind of, I don't know if you've ever read Shatner's book, but his is just say yes. Like, it's called, it's Shatner's World. And he talks about, just say yes. When people say, why am I doing this what am I doing this commercial for? Well, I haven't done it. Why not? Just say yes. And you'll find that you'll get a lot more out of life than if you just don't do anything. And I always find too, even when approached for this, I never in a million years thought I would be sitting across, a great co-host and good hosts here. I never thought that I'd be talking podcasting, but I said, why wouldn't I?
Yeah,
yes.
I'm saying whatever you set out to do, in so many cases you end up doing the thing that you least expected to be doing.
Sure.
In my case, writing film scores. I mean, it's something that was ingrained in me, and I discovered that I was good at it, but it's not what I ever expected to be doing, but it just kind of happened because I was doing so many different things.
Yeah, and at USC you met Brian Singer, who I believe was a PA at one time. So this relationship gets forged, and I'm jumping through time a little bit here, but I want to. So you go into Usual Suspects, okay? This movie turns out to be an amazing calling card, and brings to light so many things. But you had a great story, and I love this about you were scoring. You talk about you had a temp track. You were putting this movie together, and I love this. You were putting the movie together on a flatbed in your home. Cat was scratching at the film, and then you had this score. And I'll let you pick it up if you recall, but an exec said about the score, expected it to play hipper, younger.
Yeah, we expected like a more of a hip kind of score.
Yeah.
And I remember the moment specifically because I was sitting outside on a park bench outside of a screening room with Brian, and we had an internal screening of the rough cut, and with the temp score, which is all Jerry Goldsmith and all this kind of stuff, which you wouldn't expect. And basically, says we were expecting something hipper, like Tarantino-esque, and I said good, and I think I said good at the same time, same time Brian said good, and Brian says because that's exactly what we're not going to do.
Perfect.
So, and I don't think, Brian reacts to what I create, and then he reacts to it, and so if it works, he's an advocate for it, and so by taking the film in that direction with the temp score, he instantly sees what I'm seeing, and we kind of have very similar sensibilities, and it becomes a no-brainer. That's exactly what we have to do. And so then he becomes a cheerleader for that approach.
Yeah, I think it's such a great story because, again, it's an executive who's like, yeah, I thought it was going to be younger, and you're like, well, that's exactly what we're not going to do. And then you come out with Usual Suspects, which is a huge hit. It's a critical darling, an audience darling. Puts Bryan Singer's name right up on the map. You get accolades. It was a great score. And when you're editing a movie like this, like a Usual Suspects, it's so important because you don't want to tip your hand so that you know who Kaiser Sose is anywhere until you and Brian want the audience to know.
Right.
And it was such a punch to the gut. So I got to fast forward to today because so many things have changed in filmmaking, scoring, editing, even directing. A, do you think Usual Suspects would be even considered to be made today?
Sure. I think so. I would. I don't know. I'd go see it. Of course, I'm old, so I'd go see that while we're going to see a superhero film. But I think everyone wants a good, gritty, interesting caper. It just sort of like Suspects in a way kind of did it, But there's been wannabes. Maybe not because they haven't done well. I guess the wannabes haven't done that well, but
it's just interesting. I would see an exec going, "Oh, yeah, we can continue franchising this with the Files of Kaiser Sose or Kaiser, and you weren't thinking sequel when you were making Usual Suspects."
Oh, exactly. I see what you're saying. It would be made today as a standalone, interesting movie as opposed to on the following.
We're gonna franchise.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that is a depressing thing about current day movies is the thing is, and then when something original does come out, it's completely rewarded. The audience usually loves it. Yeah. And so, but it's just an insecurity thing. There's stockholders, there's release dates, and there's a sure way of making some big cash, and so the studio's going to want to do that. And and now there's so many franchises out there, so everything's becoming a sequel.
It's interesting because Nice Guys, right? That's another recent movie of yours. It's out, and that left it very open for a sequel.
Absolutely.
Yeah, unfortunately, I would be awesome, but it didn't do.
Why do you think that? Here's the thing, him and I loved it. Why do you think that it just didn't hit audiences? I am very furious that it's not hitting in the right way.
I don't know. I don't know. For some reason, a big summer release for that movie was weird for me because it's really not a big summer movie. It's sort of a movie that would come out a different time of year and be discovered. I don't know. I was surprised it was going to come out the same a week before X-Men. I was like, I don't know. It just feels like it was maybe put in the wrong time of year or something.
Yeah, it's so funny you say that because one of the fans of the show that I was having a back and forth with, it was a very intelligent conversation. It wasn't, nobody was negative and saying, you suck, or anything like that. He was actually going, why do you think? And the person actually said, he goes, Demetri, he's like, do you think had they released it at another part of the year? And I'm like going, it's a great question. Yeah, had they maybe gone like August, September, October, just before those big releases for the holidays. They could have. I think they could have. I mean, my other thought was they really held screenings up until and reviews until Cannes, and then Cannes, it was like a week and a half after Cannes that the movie was released. They didn't. That marketing team didn't have any time to exploit the relationship between Russell Crowe and Ryan Gosling and say how great they both are. Because usually in ads you would get Crowe's best in years, and people love a comeback like that.
Although I will say the trailers were amazing for it.
Absolutely.
The trailers were great.
Couldn't wait.
And they played for a long time before the film came out. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, it's kind of, going back just for 1 second, it's a tangential question that I had. Demetri said you edited on a flatbed, the first one, right? And from your perspective, how has the editing process for you changed? Because, I mean, early on, right, because back in college, we used to do it a little bit, and you had to be very precise, and you did not want to try many other things.
Right.
Now, with editing, do you feel much more free to just, let's just see it?
It's one of my soapbox issues, because if you came from my time, you had to force yourself into imagining what the scene was going to be before. At least I did, before you're going to create it, because it's so laborious to physically edit the thing and make any changes. And it really, I'd map out what the scene's going to be, and then I would try to make the scene the way I've imagined it. And then the landmines are when you can't do it, because you don't have the angle you wanted when you thought about it. So basically, I almost storyboarded the scene in my mind before I'd watch the dailies, and they'd be sort of in my head, and so I knew what was practical, what wasn't practical in terms of my imagination of what the scene's going to be. Anyways, and then you create it. And then what happened when digital editing came around, and the people who knew how to use computers weren't necessarily editors, and editing became, let's just throw everything against the wall and just see if that works. So maybe that'll work. Maybe that won't work. And there was no. You really got a sense that there wasn't any specific vision behind the editor, who really weren't editors at the beginning, because they weren't, it wasn't like Thelma Schumacher was immediately using an Avid, So, and I remember going to movies with Brian, and we would look at a movie and we would know whether that was cut on film or not. We do, because because you could tell it was just terrible editing, But having said that, then when the people who were more classically trained, as it were, with physical editing, learned the systems, as it were, like I did, then it's a godsend, because that thinking process I still have. So when I am cutting a film, even though I have digital medium at my disposal, I'm still imagining what that scene's going to be first, and then I do it. Because I hate making changes, even though they're digital, and I'm old. It takes me longer to figure things out on the computer, but it's still that way, and so that's one of my pet peeves about when editors are trained. These new generations of editors can never really be. They're not going to, knowing the digital medium exists, no one's going to sit there and train cutting film on a splicer. It's never going to happen. So yeah, that's my.
It's funny, because last week we had talked about Alice Through the Looking Glass, and the cinematographer Stuart Dryberg had pretty much said something similar, because he was, as a cinematographer, they're like, what are your thoughts on digital? And he said something, he goes, well, it's here, you got to deal with it. He goes, but I do miss when working on film, you shot it, that was it. You had to wait a day for the dailies. So in my head, creatively, I had to be thinking of the problems, because they weren't something that you can easily, readily fix in digital.
Right.
And I had to pre-visualize what was going on. He goes, I still do that today, because it's a great exercise for my head and my mind. And it sounds like you've taken up right on that. But editing, I would have to think, you need to put these pieces of the puzzle together. You need to figure out pacing. And this is all stuff you've edited. You've been in that editing bag.
Not as much as you, but I've edited.
Yeah,
but
I mean,
to
like, me, if you have a vision of what that scene, and again, it's how much you were asking what makes a good editor. It's like, some have more of the filmmaking gene more than others, and it's like and I used to make films all the way, through my childhood, whatever. So when I'm looking at a scene, I'm envisioning it as, I guess, a filmmaker would, and then if the scene can't do that, well, with the luxury we have of the budgets I've been working on now, I can go get that. I want a shot of someone walking from here to there and sitting down, so I can make this whole thing that I've thought happen, and so I can go.
Was there a scene like then Apocalypse? Because last time we talked for Days of Future Past, right? It was you that wrote the Raven walking through the airport scene, correct?
Oh, I didn't write it. It was an idea of that she needed to be contacted from Cerebro, and I said a train station, and they ended up doing an airport.
Was there such a scene in Apocalypse that you just needed like a little snippet?
No, there was. I mean, I had some requests, but we didn't do them. So, but there wasn't anything like that in Apocalypse where it's like I have an idea for an entire shoot of a whole scene we should do. We didn't have that. Oddly, that luxury. We could have, but we didn't do it. There were so many moving pieces on this film that, and so many mini crises that we couldn't. It was we had to allocate time and energy to other things. But no, not really. I mean, there are always shots I want that we go get, and always connectors that we go get, and so forth.
So when you're doing that too, again, we always talk about how filmmaking is a very collaborative process. So would you be with Brian, maybe your second unit director, and going and just talking about, okay, I know this is what we're doing today. This is what I need. And is that by in a sense, this little committee where Brian says, well, yeah, how does that work? Explain how that, if you know, if you could.
I can't even make up how this one was because the script was late in the process, let's just say, and the train had left the station, and we were making this movie, and there's really no. There's a third act with bullet points. They fight. Someone dies. They win. So you're basically. That's probably the most agonizing part of this movie. Was we had a little bit of this in the last film, but this one's more intense. Where it's sitting down with the previs artists and with the second unit director and trying to figure out what the fuck we're gonna do for the third act of this movie, and it was a clusterfuck of so many things going on, so many characters. We can't have them all around at the same time, which is always true with mutants because someone can save someone else. So Nightcrawler can just keep vamping people out, so we got to knock him out somehow, and everything's a whack-them-all with mutants. In the last film, we couldn't have Blink near Bishop near the wall because she just keep blinking him out, and so we had to get her distracted, go over there and deal with that so that he could die over here. And so these are all the things that have to be figured out, and then how to, I guess, finding a clever way to do the obligatory, the bad guy dying at the hands of the good guys. How do you do that? That's interesting, and so we came up with the mind. The mind battles we call it, we go into the psyche. At least it adds some cleverness to the obligatory killing the bad guy.
Yeah, because I think about these sort of superpowers that at a certain point it becomes such a mental exercise. So how do you visually tell it? So I did like that approach to it, where now we're going to be in this space. And do it that way.
It makes it a little more interesting. And also it's like, because I'm old, people just blasting each other with superpowers like, yawn, I'm bored, I want something. Frankly, if I had it my way, they'd go into the mind battle and play a game of chess. And it would be, I talked about this, and the second unit director was totally on board with this too, where it's a dialogue, it's a war of words, the Tarantino moment where Charles is sitting there in Apocalypse, not playing chess, but anyways, it's the words get under his skin. It becomes like something very psychological, as opposed to even more psychological than it was. But the decision was instead to have people punching each other. But because it
looked good, it was paced really well. And I liked actually what you did with Xavier in putting him in. You had that room in which Apocalypse himself was growing bigger. And you had the big Apocalypse like punching him down, but yet he couldn't take away his mind. But I enjoyed going into that room in the air. It looked like it was the Academy, and then you had the grand fight scene outside. But to your point, now that you mention it, yes, how do you separate our characters from? Because sometimes it's like the Superman effect. He's so powerful. What do you got to do to weaken him?
The moment Brian tweeted, "We're going to make X-Men Apocalypse," I instantly thought, we're screwed because it's this omnipotent guy. We just did this with Superman. How are you going to kill him? That was the first thing with their mind, not even knowing who Apocalypse was, only knowing he was omnipotent. And I was like, what are we going to, and this was like 2 years before we even got, or a year and a half before we even shooting it. But yeah, and so that was the biggest challenge, how to keep that not just typical,
Yeah, and now, and again, just picking up what you were saying, like in Days of Futures Past, that was arriving to theaters as they call wet. And just for the audience, what that means is when there used to be film, they would have to rush the film from the developer, whether it's Deluxe or Photochem, and it would be coming from its solution to the studio, and then they'd have to distribute it out to your fine local theaters everywhere.
This was really wet. This was dripping.
Even more so than Days of Futures Past.
I would say, yeah, because, it wasn't 5 a.m. finishing the dub bloodbath as the last one was, but it was very tight because, so the last X-Men movie was supposed to come out 3 months later than what we ended up coming out because we switched release dates with Apes to give them more time, and we were in good shape. So we came out way earlier, and then they based the schedule for Apocalypse on exactly that schedule, like with the assumption everything's just going to go exactly right again on this crazy gigantic movie, which was even bigger in many ways than the last one. And so, and then we left a couple weeks late from Montreal, so the whole film was crunched. So we had basically 2.5 weeks to dub the film. So we had less time to dub this movie than like a rom-com because of the length of the film, 2 hours and 15 minutes or something, plus titles. And so mathematically, that gave us like a day and a half, 2 days for each reel to dub, which was insane.
That's crazy.
And I mean, did you have more time to score on this?
No.
No.
But so there's that problem too. I mean, everything was it was.
But this is more. I mean, it came out certainly more ambitious than as great as Days of Future Past was. This score, I think,
Well, it had to because the film needed it, and it's that kind of movie where Days of Future Past was a more, I would say, more modern movie, and so I was able. It's just a different movie. This one's far more popcorn. This is far more superhero-esque, and so it needed a more traditional score. I knew the moment I read it, this is going to be a traditional score, whereas Days of Future Past was a fusion of orchestra and a lot of synthesizers and stuff.
Yeah, I want to talk about orchestra. I want to talk about this score. I want to sort of transition into score now because Apocalypse to me is perhaps your most ambitious score to date, I felt. You really go back to the early Jerry Goldsmith. It was very Omen-esque. I was listening. It reminded me of a little Mola Ram chant from Temple of Doom. You were using a choir. You were using orchestration. The opening sequence, I thought, was amazing. And then you blend in, your superhero, your X-Men theme, which I thought it was one of the best openings. Like, this is one of the greatest opening sequences, credit sequences, too, that I'm going to see this summer. Walk us...
Like the airplanes and the swastikas, and I was like, okay.
I felt
like we were watching a History Channel opening title sequence or something.
In 3D, in a big screen, it looked amazing. But even leading up to that, with the pyramid and Apocalypse.
Yeah, that was tough because that's a long sequence to keep that alive. With the music was really hard. I did it in like 4 sections. I mean, literally they were called Part A, B, C, and D. I mean, it was a hard score because it was a lot of it. I recorded 125 minutes of score. I mean, not that that's all in the movie, but I didn't have time to score to all the new versions I was cutting. So I was scored all the long versions of the movie and had to cut it down. But yeah, it was a lot of work. Having said that, though, when it's purely orchestral, which this was, I can write faster because I'm not dealing with synthesizer tracks and mixing things. Because, when you do synthesizer tracks, those are your final product coming from your studio. So you really are producing laboriously mixing tracks and weaving in sound design along with your orchestra. And it's like, rather just writing it all, it's all going to be reperformed later. I can do a mock-up that's a little rough or at a time. It doesn't matter because we're going to reperform it anyway.
So regarding scoring, you coined a phrase, the wallpaper effect.
Yes.
In a sense. So tell us a little bit about the wallpaper effect and how it affects scoring today, and how much different it is from, like, I almost get a sense as a person who listens to a lot of score, there's the pool of people who use orchestra. See, it seems to be becoming smaller.
Right.
So go ahead. Because
well, first of all, leading into the wallpaper effect, which can sometimes be fine, is I think there's this misconception that if themes or motifs are used in movies, it's going to be dated, and therefore your score is going to sound like some yesteryear thing. And that's not true. And it's a talent set, but if you can do a score that is traditional in the sense of themes and motifs, and not have it sound like it came out 40 years ago. You can do it. It's just a lot of work. It's very hard, and it requires a certain brain. And so you can do that. But I think the baby has been thrown out with the bathwater. So basically, well, that sounds gay, having it be having a theme. So let's just have nothing, And so let's just have, as the wallpaper string ostinatos, which is easy. I can do that, and I can actually have a life and go to a movie or dinner or something, and it's easy. And and sometimes that's appropriate, and it works great. Sometimes a drone is far more profound than using something lyrical. It may not be interesting to listen to on an album, which is how all scores are judged, which makes no sense. But don't get me on that subject. Scores should be judged on how it's working in a movie. But yeah, and so that's basically what's happened. It's the safe thing to do.
Right.
And here's another reason it happens is when the editor is making the film, and everyone sees the scene for the first time, he'll throw in something. And a lot of editors aren't necessarily musically inclined, and they'll throw in some and that's the first association that everyone has, and they're like, "Oh my God, it's great!" And never again will they ever be able to see that scene and imagine something better or thematic or lyrical, and so what happens is, I think Richard Kraft, agent I had, he said this: every score has become the bastard child of the next, because that basically a wallpaper's been thrown in, the composer is hired, and then he has to basically do new wallpaper.
Right.
And then once in a while, a composer will come on and say, if he has the clout and the diplomacy, and is a filmmaker himself, he may say, here's the reason this wallpaper isn't serving the film the way it should. Let me show you, and then a better score is born.
Right.
But.
Yeah, which again, just going back, like I do find that going away from orchestration, which saddens me. It really does, because I agree that you can have themes, motifs in an action movie, in a horror movie, in a sense.
Yeah.
There's no reason why not to. You don't need to do it for the score. Should never be. It should always complement the film, and it shouldn't overpower the film. But it should help the film overpower the audience.
Right. And it should become, every score, whether it's wallpaper or not, the score should be the soul of the movie. And if you can take the score away from the movie and have it be representative of that movie, then it's probably a better score than in other words, a lot of scores are interchangeable. There's nothing to tell me that score works for that film just as well as, it could just work for that film as well. So it's like you said, the wallpaper effect is this interchangeableness. I'm not being eloquent here, but where there's really nothing to signify that score is special in any way for that movie, because it just sounds like that other score. So
yeah, and you also mentioned something that was very funny to me. You talk about when you're choosing like a source music type of a thing, make sure it's going to transcend time. Your example was Silent Running. It's like an out of nowhere Joan Baez song comes up, and for me that's Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, where out of nowhere, raindrops keep falling in my head. Shows up, and it takes me out of a movie. Albeit it's still a great movie and still as watchable today as it was then, but they weren't thinking about the long term. They weren't thinking 30 years down the line.
Yeah, I mean, the audience then, when they watch it, it's cool because they're using a song that's popular at that moment, but it's going to date the film immediately.
Absolutely.
You know, although Raindrops has become so iconic with that movie, but yeah, Silent Running, that's woof.
Yeah. It's just funny. So I have to talk about Nice Guys too, because here's another score for me. You know, you'd work with Shane Black and Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, and you made this great caper fun style score, not set in any time period or whatever. It works fantastic. Nice Guys is purely a 70s period piece, mystery kind of movie, and you're collaborating with David Buckley.
Right.
So how was that? How did that collaboration come about? How did it look? I can tell you from the movie to the album, and for whatever reason, the score version came out like 2 weeks later than the disco version of Nice Guys. But the collaboration to me, and again, very accomplished. You had this great sense of 70s, like Schifrin. I was hearing the theme from SWAT. I was hearing, Spill That Wine a little bit at the car show. It was one of my favorites. How did this collaboration come about? And it seemed to be a very synergistic one for you.
Yeah, I mean, I started writing the score 3 months before I left for Montreal to shoot X-Men. And I was begging for reels because I was freaking out that I had to leave. And they said they would give me dripping wet reels that they had just put together. So it was all very long and rough, and I started scoring those reels immediately, you know. But and I wrote this theme that it's a long story, but I wrote this theme that everyone creamed over, you know, and wrote these reels, and then I had to leave, and David Buckley was supposed to come on anyhow because of UK European finance. There had to be a European composer on the movie.
Right. Interesting.
He was going to come on anyhow, but thank God. And so because I had to left, and I started shooting X-Men, and then the reels would come in, and the stuff I'd written wasn't working anymore in terms of timings and so forth.
Right.
So David came on and basically would be on the phone with me after I'd be shooting, and I'd get him on Skype, or I brought my studio with me, and after shooting, I'd go down there and write some stuff. And it was a back and forth, and then came the wonder if this kind of score is the right thing to do as we're writing. You know, so let's try to imagine every possible route we can take with the score. And so it became the Thriller Basic Instinct kind of score. Right. And would write, there was like this 6-minute sequence, which we constantly would apply the new idea to the sequence to see what people thought. It was basically the introductory characters with Healy and all that, and Marsh. And then we went through so many different musical ideas. I literally were like, should we try circus music now? I mean, is it going to be that crazy? You know, and the modern music approach was always a mistake to do on a period movie. And then it came full circle, and it was re-embraced, and we were allowed to finally go for it. You know, because I guess the challenge for this movie, Kiss Kiss Bang Bang was not a period piece. It was a current day movie, and so I decided to do the retro thing to give it some sort of weird signature, some weird personality. But Nice Guys is a period piece, so when you do 70s music on a 70s movie, it can be very close to parody. And how do you do that without it feeling like you're making fun of the movie as opposed to being with the film?
I think I said that during our podcast.
That is true.
I think
because it could easily become Naked Gun.
Absolutely.
And we did. We struggled with that because it would go too far, and like, okay, that's really gay, you know. Yeah. So that was the biggest challenge of it, you know, pushing it but not being.
Well, it came out again. You know, you even had the guitar riffs were just right, but never. It never went into parody, but it fits that movie, and that movie is just, again, we loved it.
Wow.
One of my favorite movies of the year, definitely of the summer thus far. It's original. It's not a superhero movie.
Yeah.
It's you can sequelize it.
If you're ever curious, listen to our podcast.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So we're getting unfortunately a wrap up sign, but I'm gonna go a little bit longer. I apologize because I have to bring this full circle. around, because, and we'll go to Apocalypse. So yet again, Star Trek shows its form, its fine form in another X-Men movie. You use it in Days of Futures Past to great effect.
Thank you for noticing.
And in this one, Star Trek, when he's in Storm's Flat, what's this? It's TV. And what is on, and again, only the purists of Star Trek diehards, was there, it's an episode of Star Trek. It's a classic, great morality tale called Who Mourns for Adonis? And I talked about it. It's about the Greek god Apollo, who kidnaps the valiant crew of the Enterprise.
And he wants to control. He wants to be worshipped, and loved, because and so I.
How did this happen? Was this your idea?
Yeah, there was nothing on the TV, and I was like, okay. It just clicked in my head, because my mission's always to get a Star Trek episode in anyhow I can into, like I did in the last film, and I'm like, and that just went into my head, like, wow, not only is that like the perfect in-joke, because I'll make it so we never see Kirk, Spock, or McCoy.
So that was a conscious effort, because I was thinking maybe CBS was going to charge him more to use Kirk,
They would
Spock,
have, but I wasn't concerned about that. I was
basically,
I wanted to be the ultimate in-joke. But also, it had so much to do with the movie,
Absolutely.
And then I used the line at the end, where he says, the God line, you were right. Oh my God, this is where I need my coffee. There is no room for gods.
There is no room for
and
gods.
It was a great button for the end of the scene.
Yeah. It was. I remember when I saw it, I said, oh my God, this is the perfect Star Trek episode to showcase. And how do you know it's Star Trek? Really? I just said, really?
Yeah, and I hope the guy who played Apollo went and saw the movie, because he's still alive.
He's still alive. He actually did a
fan thing.
He did a fan thing where they
episode,
brought up Apollo back, but it was so relevant to that movie that if you were having a hard time thematically, I'd just say, go watch that episode.
Exactly.
Yes, it's a little bit cheesy, but thematically, that's what Star Trek
my favorite
is all
thing
about.
too is she says, she asks a question, and he stops the episode, and he stops. No, it goes back to the episode after
He goes
seen the
back,
world.
right.
And I used the score from the episode over some of the scene they're talking. That was a lot of fun to do.
Well played, sir. Well
Thank
played. We will. We can't thank you enough. I could talk to you. We could talk to you.
We should just
for
have a
another
Star
2
Trek
hours.
bitch session.
We should.
Or
we should. Well, but we could talk about your experience in this business, and what it means, and how you work in Star Trek. But we should have a Star Trek show with. We should have them come in.
If you like people in Star Trek uniforms, we could do the Tomorrow Show with Kevin and Garl.
Absolutely.
They literally, for the show, they wear Star Trek costumes.
Wow.
Absolutely.
You gotta check it out.
Yeah. So we have to start. Are you going to the Star Trek convention in Vegas, the 50th anniversary?
I should.
Yeah. I'll talk to our friends at Creation. And are you going to Comic-Con?
Yeah, I am. I'm on a panel there.
Oh, and again, I have to ask this because this seems to be the trend in movies and scoring. And it happened, I think it started a couple of years ago, doing the live orchestral
concert
accompaniment to the movie.
Yeah.
Any plans to do that?
Some people have brought up to me, it's just so much work.
Yeah.
And I'm so burned out. But it would be fun to do. It would be fun to do like a retro one, like Suspects too. That'd be a blast.
That'd be great.
But again, it's just about time and energy and. Yeah.
All right. Well, Phil shut me up. So.
All right.
Follow him at John Ottman 1 on Twitter.
Oh, am I on Twitter? Oh,
that's your Twitter.
Good
correct?
luck. I've never even tried it. Someone signed me up, but I've never used it before.
Fair enough. Well, the website's johnottman.com, and of course, go see his movies. Nice Guys out, X-Men Apocalypse also out. So definitely. In the meantime, D Movies 1701
at D Movies 1701. Please support me on Twitter.
That's right. And follow at The Popcorn Talk and at Movie Anatomy. And for our Nice Guys review and our X-Men review, check us out there. And check out other shows. And we'll have to have you back, hopefully.
Yeah.
You want to come back again.
Anytime.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you, guys. Bye.
Phil Svitek, and the entire Popcorn Talk Network. We would like to thank you for tuning in. For questions or comments, be sure to visit popcorntalk.com. I'm Sir Richard Wentworth, and this has been a presentation of the Popcorn Talk Network.
The views expressed herein are those of the hosts only and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Popcorn Talk Network or its owners or principals.